Want to make a podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and even earn money, all in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer, so no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. And best of all, it's totally free with no catch. Ever since I discovered Spotify for Podcasters, I feel like I've been having a lot more connection with my listeners through the Q&As and polls. I highly recommend you give it a try. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started. Hi everyone, I'm Amber Rose, the religious hippie, and welcome to A Catholic's Perspective. For those of you just finding this podcast, let me tell you a little about myself. I was born and raised a cradle Catholic until I fell away from the church for 8 years. I just recently came back to the church, and I could not be happier with where I am today. I am currently a junior in college, and I'm studying graphic design. I am an ambassador for multiple amazing Catholic Christian companies, and I love working with all of them. Now, some of you may already know me from my popular religious hippie social media channels, such as TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I have all kinds of Catholic content on there, so don't forget to go check those out. So the reason I wanted to start a podcast was so that I'd be able to have a longer format which people could listen to from wherever they are. I particularly wanted to address issues that young Catholics face today in the secular world, and I want to do that by providing information along with commentary and even a little of my own opinion. I can't lie, from time to time I might be discussing very controversial issues, and some will find my opinions unappealing. But I do this out of my faith and service to God. We must keep communicating with each other, respecting each other, and put each other on the path to sainthood. I think you'll enjoy the podcasts coming up, and I thank you for being here with me. Hi everyone, and welcome back to my podcast. If you're new here, welcome. I'm Amber Rose, also known as the religious hippie, and today I have my producer with me, Todd Fisher. Thank you for being here.
Hi, how are you today?
I'm good. How about you?
Pretty good, pretty good. The date we're recording this is actually December 30th, so
Yes.
We haven't spoken really since Christmas, and I think this episode actually comes out on Friday, right?
It does, and Friday is the Solemnity of Our Lady. It's a holy day of obligation, so don't forget to attend church, you guys.
Right. You'll have to start reminding me of all these like feast days and all of the things. There's so much. I got those that know me from my other project, my Metatomics World. I study a lot of religions around the world. That's what I do. That's kind of my specialty. So because I'm always busy researching other religions and other spiritualities, I sometimes lose track of what's going on in my own religion in Catholicism, which was one of the reasons that I wanted to have this podcast with you, is just so I can brush up. So my younger brother got me a Catholic study Bible for Christmas, which I think I sent you a picture of when I got that. So that was my present. So that's like 1,200 pages of goodness I get to go through now, and really,
It's awesome.
Really, dig into that. But even that isn't going to give me all the answers and all the questions, all the stuff I still need to remember and know. And every week I get this from you, so it's always fun.
Oh yeah, for sure. I know when I have to remember like all the solemnities and feast days and everything, I use the USCCB website because they have the 2021 liturgical calendars. So every time there is a feast day or something, it's marked on there. And I just kind of put that on my calendar so that I don't have to print out the whole thing. But that's really helpful in remembering those. So that's what I do.
Microsoft Outlook needs a plugin that can just immediately put all that stuff in my calendar for me.
I agree. I completely agree.
If there's anyone from Microsoft out there listening,
don't be shy.
calendar plugin would be nice.
It would be very nice. Oh yes, especially for all those Catholics out there that are trying to like go from writing it to the computer, and it's a mess sometimes.
I have to color code things into my electronic calendars anyways, just so I can keep track of. So I have this insane color coding system that I use, and it's just like, you know, it's like a quilt of colors for every month I open up, and I'm running out of colors. I need something to be automated. I need some kind of
You need like
I
a blurple or something.
I need something that can
Blurple
inform me
color.
of what I need to know from day to day. Anyways, yeah. So tell me, so what's coming up January 1st? Tell me about this more. What's
So yeah, on Friday, it is going to be the Solemnity of Our Lady. So as I mentioned before, it is a holy day of obligation. So definitely don't forget to attend church on Friday.
Well, good, good. I will definitely do that.
Me too. I'm
Uh,
excited.
Today, we're going to do listener emails. Are you ready for that?
Yeah, I'm absolutely excited. These are going to be questions from my followers and listeners, and I'm excited to answer their questions.
These have come in across not only our religious hippie email, but they've come in across social media. So there's a wide range of things here, and I'm going to read these questions for you.
Yeah.
And hopefully you have some answers for these people. Some of these are really interesting things I don't know, so I'm very curious to hear what you have to say about them.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited.
The first question we have is, how do I take up my cross?
Ooh, good question. I always find this one difficult because everybody's cross is a different size, honestly. But in general, when it comes to taking up your cross, we first need to realize that suffering is a part of our Christian walk in life. We need to accept it without resentment or bitterness, but that's a little bit easier said than done. Basically, when you carry your cross, you are accepting anything that God pushes your way, whether that is a gift or a time of suffering. You turn towards him and you say, God, my life is in your hands. Do with my life what you will, because at the end of the day, our life is God's. He's the only one who has the right to take our life and to give us what what we have in our life. So we need to thank him even during those rough times when we feel like maybe the whole world is caving in on us, but we still need to thank him for it. And, I could probably give an example here where, let's say, God gives you the opportunity to practice patience. I struggled with this a lot when I was in retail because any people out there work in retail, you guys know what I'm talking about. So basically, a good example of this is, let's say you're extremely tired, you had a horrible day at work, you decide to get takeout food, they get your order wrong, and the first thing you want to do is scream at them. Stop, take a breather, try and be, patient and polite about it. And overall, just try not to react on your anger, because a lot of times your anger isn't justified and it's just because you're tired or something. And honestly, we're not perfect. But, the more that we try, the more we become resilient and we grow in virtue. So that was kind of a long explanation, but hopefully that answered your question.
That's good. That's good. Let's go to the next one. How to overcome lust.
Ooh, I think this is a big one, especially nowadays, because let's face it, it's everywhere. It's on billboards, magazines, TVs, phones, ads. Oh, it's everywhere, honestly. And, when it comes to avoiding it, it all comes down to examining your conscience, being self-aware, and your best defense is going to confession. I talk about this all the time, but confession is basically a baby exorcism, and your sins are forgiven and you're in a state of grace, and that makes you more resilient to those temptations. So obviously confession is going to be your best friend. But another way that you can overcome lust is by removing your lusting temptations. Like if you lust due to people you follow on social media, let's say they're models, swimsuit models, workout people, just immodesty in general, then unfollow them. It's kind of blunt, but it's really true. If you're lusting because of a TV show, stop watching it. If you lust because of pornography or online sites, get web blockers. I think a lot of time we get in our heads and we try to find ways to be like, oh, it's fine, it's whatever, I don't do it that often. But in reality, we shouldn't be striving to not do it that often. We should be striving to not lust at all. And I know that seems like a big step, but if you work on these little steps and you start unfollowing people, getting web blockers, going to confession, getting the sacraments, and another thing I would suggest is start praying the rosary daily, grow in your connection with God, read the Bible. The more we reject sin, the more resilient we become to it.
Interesting. You brought up a lot of different things that you can actually lust over.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually had never really thought about lusting beyond like an infatuation toward a person or in a sexual way. But you really kind of filled it out here that lust can actually take on a lot of different types of temptations.
Yeah. It's everywhere, unfortunately, especially with our sexualized culture. I think it's gone from, I guess back in the 1900s, women wearing bathing suits that were below their knees, and that was scandalous. And now we have bikini models half dressed, if that, on billboards everywhere. So it's very odd how it's snowballed so far, but to be resilient to it means we need to start rejecting it.
One of the things I like about you and your podcast is you really kind of lead by example. You are like a lot of people out there. You are going to have your fallible days like others will. What do you find are the temptations for you? What do you particularly find yourself lusting after? I know you did have a lot of like sugar cookies at Christmas time, but I don't think that necessarily falls into this category. What do you find yourself falling victim to, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm going to be real with you guys. I lust after other women's bodies because I want to look like that. I want to be taller. I want to be skinnier. I want to have her lips. I want to have her eyelashes. I want to have her hair. And something I had to really kind of drill into myself is that 90% of that woman is fake. 90% of that woman is cosmetics, and 90% of that woman is wigs. Okay, there are natural beautiful people out there. There are, and all more power to them. However, and there are people who have amazing bodies because they work hard to do that. There's no diet pill that's going to give you automatic results. There's no magic smoothie that's just going to make you look like a Barbie doll, and that's something I really had to drill into myself, especially since in society, you don't get anywhere in life unless you're pretty or unless you have something to offer, if you know what I mean. And being a teenager growing up in that type of mindset in society because of the movies I used to watch and the music I listened to and the celebrities I followed, that's what I believed. And that's obviously not true at all. You can be beautiful on the inside and the outside. And when you're beautiful on the inside, it shows and you glow on the outside. And that's just something that comes with the sacraments and learning about who you truly are, being a child of God and having confidence in yourself and in your relationship with the Creator. But that is one that I have struggled with and do still struggle with quite a bit, because I will see these models and I'm just like, haha, and I'll look at my legs and I'm like, ooh, I'm short. So just stretch me out a little longer, please. But, we're all beautiful in our own ways. And in general, I know society tries to say like different is better and stuff like that, but it's an underlying message. It's kind of like a backhand to your face, because even though they say it, it's a lie. They don't mean it. They're just like, okay, yeah, you can do this, this, and this, but you have to have 10 pounds of makeup on and you have to look like this and you got to do this and stuff. And it's just one of those things where it always irritated me that we have to go through this as women, and even men. I know men struggle with that as well. They see these buff macho guys on Instagram and they're just like, whoa, and then they're like, my arm is a noodle. So I understand that perspective too, but I think it affects women a little bit more because we tend to be a little bit more nitpicky about our appearances. But in general, that is probably the biggest issue I've had.
Right. Well, good. I'm glad you answered that. I was very curious.
Yeah, it's a big one.
How do you deal with hate when you veil?
When I veil, so honestly, I've never actually dealt with hate due to veiling. I've gotten some weird stares and I've gotten some odd, looks. But most girls at my parish veil, and we see it more as a devotion. So the hate that I usually see usually comes from the Norvis Ordo parishes. And at least in my experience when I started, I used to go to a Norvis Ordo parish and I'd get all these weird looks and stuff. And from what I understand from people who are upset about women who veil, it's they view veiling as like a threat almost, which is very weird. But basically, they think that we think that we're better than everyone else because we veil, which isn't the case at all, of course. But I do believe the hate comes from the people who feel conviction. I think that's where most hate comes from. And maybe they don't see it or realize it, but I believe that's one of the things that it could potentially be. Um, I've met a few people who are just like purely like ignorant, and they think that when women veil, they're suppressed. And maybe in some religions, but for us, we view it as a devotion and we think it's very beautiful. And I don't think some people understand the significance behind it, and they could probably use some more information about the matter. But overall, when dealing with hate, I think, people can just be rude in general. So remember to pray for them. The people who are least worthy of our prayers probably need them the most. So when it's possible, never pass up an opportunity to teach about, veiling, why you veil, your personal opinion on it. That's great too. But honestly, just education in general can lead to a lot of great discussions if the person is open minded enough to talk about it.
Good, good. We have an email that asks what your goals for the rest of 2020 and 2021 are.
I have so many. Well, technically now it would technically be 2021.
Yeah.
But like personally, I have quite a few goals. So I want to continue growing in education with the church history. I want to get better at realism drawing. I'm very abstract with my art. I like to be creative with colors and everything, but actually being able to draw something and make it look realistic is something I've always struggled with because I like to design cartoons and flowers and things of that nature. So I might try and do that a little bit more. I really want to learn how to make like homemade bath balm, like bombs and balms. That sounds weird. And like soaps and like things like that, just because it can save money, but also I think it would just be a cool skill to learn. And also I could create my own bath bombs so that I could put my own scents in them and stuff like that. I could literally have unlimited bath bombs. Like what female does not want that?
And
Honestly.
and for the FBI that's listening, she did say bath bombs.
Yeah,
We
there's a
should
dash
specify
there.
that. There's
There is a dash there. I love bath bombs. But besides that, I do want to become better at prayer journaling. I do keep a prayer journal, and while I enjoy it, I am not always consistent. And a lot of the times I will write for like a week and then it goes on my shelf and I forget it exists. So, in order to do that, I want to start putting it places where I will see it more often and I'll remember, like, oh yeah, I have to prayer journal or I want to prayer journal. And I think that's really important too. Um, Something also I've really been intrigued the last few months is actually ballet. And I used to be a ballerina when I was younger, when I was a kid, but and this is not like I was very good, but I still liked it. um, but I've been really intrigued by like Swan Lake and the Nutcracker and things like that because I used to go see those plays when I was younger. And so I've really been kind of interested in watching more ballet and learning the different types and just kind of learning about it. It's one of those hobby things where I don't know if I could really do it, but I'd like to learn about it. um so that's kind of that. um but as for some other goals that I have, I want to get to know Our Lady better, so I bought some more books, which is basically a year with Our Lady, where you go through every day and you read scripture, and you spend time meditating with Our Lady, which is really awesome. I want to attend Mass 3 times a week for like at least a month, just for I don't know, spiritual benefits, purposes, and kind of just a new challenge, try to go to Mass more often than just Sunday. Because even though Sunday is a holy day of obligation and we should be going and everything like that, and that is the one day we go, I still feel like we should go more often, even when it isn't a holy day of obligation or, um, a Sunday. So that's kind of like another thing I've been trying to integrate. I also want to learn more about the early church fathers and get more involved in my parish. At my parish, we can cook meals for the priests and we can do stuff like that. And I really want to kind of get into that a little bit more. And of course, I want to continue evangelizing on social media, YouTube, and podcasting. So those are kind of my main goals. I'm probably going to write them down, print them out, laminate them, stick them somewhere where I can see them so that I don't forget, because I'm a very forgetful person. It's not good.
And all the fans out there, be sure to prompt her via social media messages and emails to make sure she keeps doing this.
Remind me, just in case.
Could we expect any, I don't know, religious hippie products that might come out? Maybe.
Possibly. Yeah. Possibly some Bibles, rosaries, something like that in the future. Yeah.
It would be great. I think the fans would be interested in that. Give us feedback. What you would like to see the religious hippie put her name on.
T-shirts everywhere. Just everywhere T-shirts. That would be funny.
They just have your .com address on it. That's all they say. Big letters.
That would be hilarious.
White shirts, black print. It'll be simple.
Oh, yes.
The next question is, what is the story of the scapular?
Ooh, one of my favorite stories. So, okay. So I'm going to give this summary because it's actually a pretty long story. And if I was to actually tell you the whole story, we would probably be here for like 30 minutes. So basically the story goes like this. On July 16th, 1251, this was a Sunday, Our Lady appeared to Saint Simon. He was Saint Simon's Stock in Cambridge, England. And she appeared to him as Our Lady of Mount Carmel. So Our Lady gave Saint Simon the scapular and said, "Take, beloved son, this scapular of thy order as a badge of my confraternity. Yeah, I know how to say that word. And for thee and all Carmelites, a special sign of grace. Whoever dies in this garment will not suffer everlasting fire. It is a sign of salvation, a safeguard in dangers, a pledge of peace and of the covenant." So Our Lady gave a special promise of protection to all the members of the Carmelite order and a special grace to those who, in the hour of death, wear the scapular. And this is so that they will not go to hell, but rather be taken to heaven on the first Saturday after death. Now, it's important to remember that this is not a get into heaven ticket or a get out of hell card. This is a devotional, and like such, we need to treat it like one. So there are prayers that go along with it. There are, it's a devotional. So don't view it as like, a Monopoly get out of jail card. That's not what this is. There are still, some devotions to it.
Did you have more?
No, that was it. That was my little summary. I thought I had more, but then I was just like, no, I think that basically summed everything up I wanted to say.
No, that's good. I'm not familiar with that at all. So I'm actually going to look into it more. I've got to get to the bottom of more things like this that I hear about for the first time with you. So.
Oh yeah. Honestly, it's super exciting to learn new things. But in general, I feel like the scapular, along with like Our Lady of Fatima, even though they're known, they're not like well known. And even like, so like Our Lady of Carmel, she was the one who gave the scapular, and people know the apparition, they know the Marian apparition, but they don't know the story behind it. So I think it's really cool to be able to give that little summary and kind of explain the important parts. And then if people want to dive deeper into it and everything like that, they can definitely do that.
This next question is a really interesting one.
Mm-hmm.
How do I become a saint?
Ooh. All right. That, I mean, they're like, okay, there's hundreds of answers to this. Obviously, sainthood is what we want to strive for because that means we go to heaven and become intercessors for other people on earth, just as the saints are for us. Anyone who makes it to heaven is a saint. Um, so I've basically narrowed it down to a few main things in order to become a saint, even though there are other things you can do, in between it. But these are like some of the main ones. So one of the first things we need to do is we need to strive for truth, the real truth. So not our truth, but God's truth. We need to engage in the truth by engaging in knowledge, and we need to immerse ourselves in scripture, the catechism, and good Catholic books. Even devotional prayers, saint autobiographies, writings, and apologetic books are great for this. Second, we need to submit ourselves to God's will. Obviously, this is easier said than done for a lot of us these days, but basically, we need to speak our fiat as Our Lady did. We need to start saying yes to God, and you will see the amazing changes He can make in your life. Of course, this is always difficult because I know sometimes it might be scary because we don't always have the best trust in God, especially in today's society. I feel like there are very few people that actually trust Him. But I think it's a good thing to start doing. And honestly, it'll gain trust. It really will, because no matter what, He is there with you. And He is willing to see you through every step of your life. And He's there holding your hand. It's just you have to say yes to Him because He knows what's best for you. And then, thirdly, we need to live out our faith. So we need to read about it, but not just read about it. We also need to act on it, because just reading about it isn't going to get us anywhere. The best way to learn is by experience. So practicing charity and helping in a soup kitchen, or practicing patience, or learning something new is going to do a lot more good than just reading about it. Obviously, reading about it is important. Like I mentioned in the first thing, we need to immerse ourselves in good Catholic books and devotional prayers, but we also need to act it out in our everyday lives. Otherwise, people are just going to be like, well, what's so different about you? You're not that much different from me. And it's true, we're not much different from each other. However, the way we live our lives out can totally change somebody's mind about Christianity. So I think that's really important. And in general, Mother Teresa, she lived out her faith boldly. Like, she was right there helping, the poor, the sick, the needy. And we really need to tap into that and live out our sainthood, basically. And now, obviously, we can strive for sainthood by honoring God in our everyday life and asking for help from the saints and Our Lady. But I've noticed most of this, but obviously, we need to really take our own kind of path, because even though there are so many saints and they're all diverse and everything, no one saint is alike. They're really not. So we really need to figure out where God is calling us and saying yes to Him.
Good. Great answer.
Thank you.
So the next one, kind of, I think, related to an earlier question we had, but why do you veil?
So, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I have a few reasons, but I'll list my main reasons. Otherwise, we're going to be here forever. But basically, one of my main reasons is because it follows Our Lady's example of obedience, humility, dignity, modesty, and submission to God. It's also biblical. If you go throughout the Bible, you will find almost every single woman in that Bible covering their heads. Some examples of this is Genesis 24, 64 through 65. Rebecca also looked up and saw Isaac. She got down from her camel and asked the servant, "Who is that man in the field coming to meet us?" "He is my master," the servant answered. So she took her veil and covered herself. So it's been a form of modesty for many, many, many years. Another example of this is 1 Corinthians 11, 3 through 6. But I want you to realize that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of and the head of the woman is man, and the head of Christ is God. Every man who prays or prophesies with his head covered dishonors his head, but every woman who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head. It is the same as having her head shaven, for if a woman does not cover her head, she might as well have her hair cut off. But it is a disgrace for a woman to have her hair cut off or her head shaved. Then she should cover her head. I know that seems like super like wear your veil or die kind of thing, but you have to remember that this was, back in the day. So I like to follow that example, but also before Vatican II, it was actually a requirement for women to cover their heads with a scarf, veil, or hat of some kind when in the presence of the Eucharist. Personally, I might get some hate for this, but I still think it should be required.
Interesting.
Yeah, I know, but I personally do. The heart of the Catholic Church, honestly, is the altar, and we can see by example that it is always veiled, and the tabernacle is also always veiled. And in general, it's just, like I said, it's a sign of humility, dignity, submission, modesty, obedience to God. And he gave us this inner femininity, and we need to embrace that. And I have some other reasons, but that might be for another time because those are a lot.
Right. Good. All good stuff. Very interesting.
Thank you.
It's interesting to me that how religion can influence fashion in a way. I mean, I hate to use fashion, particularly from a historical perspective, but really, fashion has really been around a long time.
Yeah.
Even if it was utilitarian, there was still some semblance of, there was a point where we quit walking around as naked human beings to clothing ourselves, and that clothing evolved, to what we have today.
For sure. I mean, veiling ourselves is very symbolic as women because we are basically showing that we are the brides of Christ. We are the brides of the church. And so when we veil, we are, it's almost a sign of like, we are brides of Christ, brides of the church. So it's very interesting to see how my generation actually is coming back into veiling a lot, even at the Novus Ordo masses now. I have been getting so many DMs from young Catholics, younger than 15. They're like 12. And they're just like, I want to start veiling, but I go to Novus Ordo. How do I not seem so presumptuous or like, hey, look at me, I'm veiling? Because, Novus Ordo, usually you don't see veils. And I always tell them, I'm like, try to get a veil that matches your hair color the best. That's what I did for the longest time. I ended up getting really darker, obviously colored haired veils. And you can get browns, you can get light blondes or whatever. That way it's less noticeable, but you can still practice veiling, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And even beyond that, the influence that religion has had on, for instance, where it came from historically, on why priests would wear robes, or the purpose of what a nun would wear. Like, it was really interesting to me. And also just I think, and we've had this discussion probably on a past podcast, but also personally, about just how disrespectful it is the way people dress in church today anyways. And just sort of that type of thing, that you should get dressed up when you go to church. And
exactly.
It's interesting to me, the influence that religion has on so many of those things. So let's move on to the next question. Someone asks, what's your favorite Catholic movie and why?
Ooh, I have so many. Honestly, my favorite movie would have to be The Song of Bernadette, the original one, the black and white one. I don't know if they did a remake or anything like that, but the old ones are always the best, whether it's the Fatima movie or whatever it might be. The old Catholic movies are usually the most accurate. They don't try to intrigue people with fancy visuals or anything. They're just there to actually tell the story. I honestly like it though, because it actually encompasses what truly happened that day at Lourdes. And overall, I mean, it was just a top-notch movie. The acting, the portrayal, and how accurate it was. The filming was great, even though, during that time, they didn't really have great film equipment, and they stayed true to the original story, which I think is super important because a lot of movies, especially today, are altered. And even though they're small details, they are still important details. For example, the new Fatima movie that just came out in 2020, they changed certain things. They had Our Lady walk to the children. That never happened. She stayed on the cloud. And little things like that, even though I know it doesn't seem like that big of a deal for somebody who's really into her Catholic faith and knows what happened. And these are super important because these are actual Marian apparitions. When a director or something gets something wrong or tries to make it different, I kind of flip because I'm just like, why did you change it? Why did she need to walk to them? There was no reason that she needed to walk to them. Like there was this whole thing. But that was just okay. I digress. But I really prefer the old Catholic movies where there was no ulterior motive. They literally just wanted to share the story. And honestly, I think the Song of Bernadette did that beautifully. Also, the Bells of St. Mary. And a couple other honorable mentions would be The Sound of Music, even though it's not specifically said to be a Catholic movie. I mean, come on, there's nuns, the beautiful, like, church where Fräulein Maria and the captain got married. Like, there were Catholic little, pieces here and there. And it was just
There were
awesome.
also Nazis.
Yeah, that part too. But we can just cut that part out.
This is the next podcast, actually, what we're getting into right now.
Yes, exactly.
We did.
And,
Did Jesus Christ Superstar, the movie, make your list?
I haven't watched that since I was like 6. And honestly, I'm tempted to rewatch it just to see if it's actually good or if it's like heretical. I'm not sure.
Well, the next podcast in 2 weeks, you and I get into, actually, it's almost a double-sized episode. We get into talking about Christian entertainment versus secular entertainment.
Yes,
So we have
do.
a big discussion about all of these things, and we talk about a lot of movies and television and film today. So we'll save some of this for the next one. But let's move on to the next question.
Okay.
Why did you start attending the church you currently attend?
Oh, good question. I actually just did a whole YouTube video kind of about this, sort of. But so I used to attend a Norvis Ordo parish near me. You've heard me mention that already. And it was basically like a childhood parish. We kind of commuted between two. We went to this Norvis Ordo parish, and then we went to a traditional Latin Mass parish, which was a little farther away. So my issues at this parish started with the secular youth group. And they basically had a lot of issues with traditional values and things like that. They made it extremely clear that my traditional values of, not being okay with contraception or abortion, they weren't okay that I was, no Eucharist in the hand, that I was purely, you should be kneeling and receiving on the tongue. They weren't okay that I thought you should only be wearing like dresses or whatever to church and not pants, even though we talked about that before. But basically, that's kind of where it started. I also had an issue with the Eucharistic ministers. I had an issue with the no reverence for the Eucharist at this specific parish. I have seen people drop the Eucharist. I have seen people step on the Eucharist. I have seen people literally pop it into their mouths like a piece of popcorn. I have seen it all at this parish. I've been pushed out of communion line because people were rushing to go up front. And whenever I met people there, it was like they weren't even Catholic. They didn't know why they were Catholic. They didn't know their Catholic values. They didn't know what it meant to be Catholic. And honestly, the turning point was when our group leader took us to a Buddhist temple as a youth group outing to meditate with a Buddhist. And that's not good. That is a grave sin. It was very weird. I hated the entire thing. I did not participate. It was awful, honestly. And I don't know why they allowed that. That should never have been an option. And they still They still try to push yoga and all this very self-centered stuff on the young generation, and it's not Catholic at all. But besides that, there was also this time when we were in a youth group, and the priest came to us and was just like, "What do you want to change about the church?" And which should never be a thing. Why on earth would you ask secular children, I'm calling them children for a reason, what they want to change in a faith that Jesus Christ created himself in 33 AD? Like, what even? And one of the women said that she wanted women priests. Another one said that abortion shouldn't be an issue and should be supported by Catholics, and contraception shouldn't be that big of a deal, and all of this stuff. Along with that, there was just a lot of support of sin. And as a person just coming back into her faith, it negatively impacted me knowing that my traditional values were not welcomed. I couldn't share my views in fear of causing these people to hate me, which was very real. And in general, I literally could see some of them clenching their fists in like a blind rage. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to shut up now before I get punched in the face. So, in general, I left and I found my traditional childhood church, which is the one I currently attend. And while I still didn't get along with some people there, many of the people there, besides a select few, had the same traditional values as I did. And I was welcomed in. I also love the priests and how passionate they are about Catholicism at my church. It really helps me that I know they're grounded in the Catholic faith, and they don't give us what we want to hear. They tell us what we need to hear. And I think that's super important because you could tell me what I want to hear all day long, and it's never really actually going to offer any spiritual growth to me until I get slapped in the face with the truth. And that's what causes change. That's what causes conversion and conviction. And that's what I was hungry for. And the other parish I was attending was just like, oh, just be who you are, be whatever you want to be. It's okay if you feel this way. Don't worry. And in a sense, I do believe that therapy is needed in certain areas, but it needs to be Catholic based therapy. It shouldn't be like, oh, let's go to a Buddhist temple and meditate as a Catholic retreat. That's not okay. And that's just basically one of the reasons out of a couple as to why I started attending the traditional Latin Mass.
Interesting. I want to ask you a couple questions about this.
Yeah.
So when you left your first church, how old were you?
That would have been 2019. So I would have like a year ago, probably.
Okay. Gotcha.
I just started attending the traditional Latin Mass in May of 2020.
Gotcha. Okay. And then when you were younger, what was your childhood like? Did your parents have you going to church? Like, what was that part of you?
Oh, yeah. We were very much so a very devout Catholic family. We went to church, we prayed the rosary, we would constantly have Catholic get-togethers with other Catholic families. We would have picnics.
Was that in the same church that you just left or a different one?
No, this was actually a separate group of people. We didn't really all attend the same church. This was more like an outside of church type of thing, but we would attend church every Sunday. And like I said, we would commute between the Novus Ordo and the traditional Latin church. That one was just, the traditional Latin Mass was just a lot farther away than the Novus Ordo one. So if we were running late, we would have to go to the Novus Ordo.
Gotcha. Okay. I see.
Yeah.
I often wonder about that. When I was growing up, there were 3 Catholic churches in the small town that I grew up in, and proximity was important. You went to the one that was closest to you, was part of how the choice was made. But you just kind of always, in small town Indiana, you kind of just went to the church that your parents took you to, that all your relatives went to. Unless there was a marriage that shifted or changed something, that's just how it was generationally.
Right.
And the only change that's happened to that now in my hometown is there's just not enough priests to handle the three churches now. So they kept all three churches open, but there's one priest that actually alternates between the three churches, and they'll have different services during the week at the different places. So not a lot of choice,
right?
And when you get into, but considering the small town I grew up in and how many churches that it had within such a small, square mileage of the actual city was really kind of incredible, and why I grew up with so much religion around me, because there were 54 churches in 7 square miles, like a really, and also 2 headquarters of international churches in this small town. So it was really kind of a crazy situation for me, and that a small town like that would even have 3 Catholic churches was already interesting enough. But in New York, all kinds of opportunities to go to any number of different things. But I'm always curious about that influence. Do people think that they can move to different churches? My younger brother likes to go to all different types of churches. He'll drive 4 counties away to attend a mass at a particular church, and then go to a different one, or one that's open 24 hours if he wants to go at midnight. So he picks and chooses all of these different things. And I wonder if a lot of people just stay with the one they've always been in because that was the one they were accustomed to when they were young. Like, does that make any sense where I'm going with this? Like,
yeah, it definitely does. I think a lot of the times, people do stick with what they know. However, I have noticed from a lot of my Novus Ordo friends who are able to attend a traditional Latin Mass, even though um, there are some that aren't like this, but from a majority of my Catholic friends who have started attending TLM, they said that they felt like they literally were missing out on something from their childhood. Like the traditional Mass just offered them so much more spiritual connection and reverence that the Novus Ordo just never gave them. And that is just something that a lot of my friends have brought up to me, and they're just like, you inspired me to go to the traditional Latin Mass, and I feel like I've been gypped like my whole life, and I'm just like, yeah, go to the traditional Latin Mass. We have fun here. But
do you think it's important that people go from church to church? In one church, if you stay there with any length of time, you will develop kind of a spiritual community within that church. You'll meet people there. You'll know other families. Kids can grow up knowing each other. Like, there's certainly a family environment that happens within the church system. You can expand on that and even grow a larger religious community by attending other churches, would you say? Or do you think they're pretty contained and like to be how they are individualistically?
no, yeah, I definitely agree with that. I mean, the thing is that there are so many different rites of of Catholicism. I go to the Latin rite, but there are so many different ways that the mass can be performed. Like in Africa, they can literally be there for 3 hours. And instead of offering money during when they walk around with the baskets, they offer fruit and they offer food. And that's in Africa, I believe. Or yeah, or Uganda, one of the two. Anyway, and so basically it never hurts to go to a new parish, even if it's just to check it out. It's really not that big of a deal. I know that we made more connections with families at the traditional Latin Mass than we did at the Novus Ordo. But from my experience, you need to go where I don't know, that sounds so weird. I don't want to say you need to go where you feel more spiritually connected to God because it's his house and it's, the church. But if you feel like they are treating Jesus Christ irreverently at the Novus Ordo and that's damaging your relationship, go to the traditional Latin Mass because they don't do that there.
Right.
And things like that. So it's one of those things where I think it can definitely grow communities. And I would definitely push people, like, if you're a traditional Latin Mass goer, test out the Novus Ordo. Like, don't test it out, but just go, and maybe you like it. Other times, maybe you'll see why you respect the traditional Latin Mass more. And if you go to the Novus Ordo, check out the traditional Latin Mass. Maybe you don't like it, but maybe it'll kind of spark a little, spiritual thing inside of you, and you'll be like, wow, I really love this. It's very different from person to person.
Yeah. Well, good. That's a great answer. So we're out of questions. So we've wrapped this Q&A up. I appreciate everyone that sent these in. And I'll just kind of repeat what we always say at the end of the show. But if you have a question that you want Amber to answer on air, you can send, she's obviously on a million social media platforms, so you can reach her through there. But also the email that we use for her podcast is thereligioushippie@gmail.com. So certainly send in any questions that you want her to answer, and we'll be doing more of these. Usually just every couple months we'll do Q&As as we get enough.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this would be really fun.
Yeah, for sure. And as we said, for the next podcast, we get into a conversation about entertainment. So that'll be fun. That's coming up on, I think, the 15th of January. And do you want to take us out with a verse reading for this one?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you guys know, this podcast coming out on Friday, which is the Solemnity of Our Lady. So I just wanted to read the gospel from the Mass, which is going to be said on Friday. So this is Luke 2:16-21. So they went in haste and found Mary and Joseph and the infant lying in the manger. When they saw this, they made known the message that had been told them about the child. All who heard it were amazed by what had been told them by the shepherds. And Mary kept all these things, reflecting on them in her heart. Then the shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all they had heard and seen, just as it had been told to them. When 8 days were completed for his circumcision, he was named Jesus, the name given him by the angel before he was conceived in the womb. So that is the gospel for today, technically, for Friday. So,
well, great. All right. Well, everyone, thanks for listening.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Todd, for being here and doing this with me. It was a lot of fun.
No problem. We'll do it again.
All right. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye. Do you have questions or comments about today's episode? Email me at thereligioushippie@gmail.com or leave a voice message at anchor.fm/thereligioushippie. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to A Catholic's Perspective with Amber Rose, the Religious Hippie. Please be sure and rate and review this podcast. This podcast is copyright. Any previously trademarked or copyright content is used by permission. Be sure to like and follow The Religious Hippie on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok, or visit her official website at thereligioushippie.com. This podcast is produced by Todd Fisher and distributed by Metacortex Publishing. And be sure to visit metatomics.org to see our listings of other unique podcasts.